So we're in chapter 13, section 6 of your world history book. And we're going to be talking about the native civilizations in a new world. So where did these native civilizations come from? Well, if we look in your Bible, in Genesis, that of beginnings, we find that mankind was trying to build their own way to heaven, build their own Tower of Babel and such for themselves, and not depending on God at all, but it was pretty much of a humanistic way. And God was grieved, and God destroyed the Tower of Babel and took the peoples and dispersed them in the world. Now, how did he take them? We don't really know. Some people think that the continents were hooked together, and if you kind of put them like a puzzle, they kind of fit, don't they? And others think that he just miraculously scattered them. And when scattering them, he gave them different languages. So they couldn't get together and couldn't find their own way without him. But, of course, they would try. And we find in the native world, we find the civilizations there very godless, or with many, many gods that they had contrived. But let's start. Let's go on where we left off. Columbus in 1492 is where we left off. Columbus, Italian that was sailing for Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella. He sails west, and thinking he's coming into the Indies, the East Indies, over by China and India area, actually, thinking that he was coming to the Orient, he called these natives Indians. That name stuck for some reason. We still call them Indians, although they're not from India and they're not from the East Indies. Well, who were these Indians? Well, they were different tribes. One of the tribes was the Arawak tribe, and that's the tribe that Columbus met. He thought that he thought the world was a lot smaller and that he was clear on the other side in the Orient. He didn't realize he was in a totally new world. So the Arawaks greeted him, probably with gifts and food and things. They were friendly Indians, but not all the Indians were friendly in that area. In fact, the Carib Indians in the Caribbean Sea, they believed in cannibalism. They were very hostile Indians. But most of the Indians there had a simple culture, and they depended on agriculture. But they were pagans in the point that they didn't believe in the true and living God. And they were pantheistic, where they believed in many gods, kind of like the Hindu cultures back at that time. Also, they were very immoral. They didn't have a standard to go by. In fact, their immorality even led to things such as human sacrifice. So, I don't know if you read the book, The End of the Spear. It was kind of how many of the tribes lived there, the end of the spear, killing each other. Let's start with one of the most ancient civilizations we know in the Western Hemisphere. And this civilization was called the Mayan. Now, you can't really find Mayans, but there are ancestors. Their ancestors are probably around the area of Guatemala today, if you look on your map or look on your globe. So they too believed in human sacrifices, but they were an impressive civilization. They almost look like the Egyptian pyramids of Egypt as you look, so you could see how possibly their advancement came back at the time of building the towers of Babel, imitating that. We don't know. But the Yucatan Peninsula, in that area, that Yucatan Peninsula is down through Mexico. That's where the Mayan culture's center was. And today, like I said, you can look in the area of the country of Guatemala. The Mayan achievements. Their achievements were pretty great. They had astronomy charts, and they charted the planets even. They had architecture, as we can see, that was pretty advanced. We see some of the architecture here. Here's one of their ancient type pyramids. They also had a 365-day calendar, the same as we do. Their calendar and their writing. They had a written number system, and they also wrote in hieroglyphics, similar to Egypt. At 200 to 800 AD, that was the height of their empire. And back when we think of 200, we think of what was going on in Europe, with Romanism and the Roman Empire and such. Well, here, this is what was happening. The Mayan culture was flourishing about the same time. And when you get to the 1500s later on, Mayan culture, the only thing left of the Mayan culture were ruins. You wonder why the Mayan culture fell. Maybe it was because of their immorality, which always leads to a fall. But let's go on from the Mayans to the Incas. If you look on your map, the Incas were in South America. And during the 1200s, the Inca civilization flourished. Now, if you go into Peru in the Andes Mountains, you can see the civilization here. Machu Picchu may be the name, as I recall. But this mountain, also they had other mountains with tops that had Inca empire capital on the top, or I should say, the Inca, what would you say, housing areas or Inca cities, So in the 1200, the Inca capital was Cusco. And their empire peaked, the Inca Empire peaked in the 1400s. So we're talking about here, have this advanced empire in Europe. We're having the Crusades, the same time. So anyway, the Inca Empire included areas of Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Argentina. And so we see how the Incas, here's an Inca dress and an Inca statue. Remember, Machu Picchu was that lost city of the Incas in Peru. So the achievements of the Inca. They were advanced in engineering. They were advanced in architecture. They had a most excellent road system, as we see here, all the way through their lands. They could actually travel by walking or, by llamas, which they used back then. They also had their stones, their architecture, their stones were so precise that they fit together without mortar. Look at this picture. If you're a builder, you say, well, how did they do that? Well, they basically had this advanced engineering to be able to do it. They also had found many artifacts of metal refining, silver, copper, bronze, and gold. And so that would bring in a lot of people, a lot of Europeans, I should say, and conquistadors and such, would come in to find this gold and the copper and the jewelry and the copper mines, and later on we'll see how the conquistadors conquered them and brought these Indians and had them work in these mines of copper, silver, bronze, and gold. They made beautiful jewelry. They even had eating utensils to eat with. They didn't eat with their hands. And many works of art. You can say many works of art in the Inca civilization. You can see how they did their step farming there how they'd be able to farm so that it would capture the water and not cause erosion. So they were pretty advanced in many areas. And their language that's even spoken today is the Quechua language. And this language is all centered in the area of Peru. Aztecs. Aztecs would be considered, as looking back in history, as the most powerful of the Indians. Originally, they were nomadic. That means they wandered from town to town, or very, very simple people. But then as they gathered together in this area, they became very powerful. And you'll see the Aztec Empire in central and southern Mexico. In 1300s, think of the 1300s and you think of the castles and crusades in Europe again. In the 1300s, this Aztec empire was a very wealthy and strong, empire. They had a sophisticated language that they even now still use that language today. They studied astronomy, engineering, and architecture, and you can see here by their cities that they were very advanced in their cities, in their pyramid type structures and their housing, and very elaborate. You can see their very elaborate dress and such, looking very wild, as they were considered very wild to those Spaniards that came in and met them. And we'll be talking about that. Their capital, Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan actually is where Mexico City is. And it was the capital of the Aztec nation. And it was huge. And it was spectacular indeed, as you see these pictures. It was set on an island there in a very shallow lake, and is built on canals, and so they got around with boats. And right in the middle there would be the Great Pyramid that they had, the Aztec pyramid. They worshipped the sun, and they worshipped many other gods. And again, they were known for human sacrifices, which is very sad. They warred with other tribes, and they took prisoners of those tribes to sacrifice to their god, which was just terrible. Sometimes they sacrificed up to 200,000 people. Oh my goodness. How sad would it be to be living in those times of the Aztecs, but the Aztecs empire would not last. Maybe it was God's judgment as God looked, as they weren't seeking the true and living God. Spain. So we talked about Columbus and Columbus colony. He came and they set up the colony, which is in Central America, in the island of Hispaniola. And on Hispaniola now we'll see Haiti and the Dominican Republic area. So this whole area is where Columbus was. So this is where the conquistadors started out, knowing that there was a colony there. Now, Columbus was a terrible governor. You know, he wanted everything a certain way, and the people, his men, did not. They were constantly mutinying, even to the point that at the end they complained so hard that they brought Columbus back to Europe with chains on and to put in jail. Of course, Isabella and Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand did not put him in jail, but they did not want him. They realized he was not good at leading the people as governor, that's for sure. But to go on with this colony, the Spanish conquistadors came in. What they wanted to do is to give glory to Spain. Although much of the conquistadors you'll find weren't even Spanish, a lot of them were Portuguese, and a lot of them were Italian, but they were sailors and they wanted to sail, and Spain would finance them to sail, and they would have to bring back treasures. And one of the greatest treasures would, of course, would be gold, if they could find gold in America. So Spain had claims now to the Caribbean Sea, to Cuba, to Puerto Rico, and to Jamaica, those areas. So you see the conquistadors coming not to settle in, but to use that as a base to explore the entire area. 1513, one of the first Spanish guys, his name was Ponce de Leon, and his I would say buddy, or they at the same time, they probably knew each other because they were the same time period, was Vasco de Balboa. And these two guys set out from Spain. Ponce de Leon was the first Spanish explorer in North America, landing, and he discovered the area of Florida. So when you think of Florida, what do you think of? Spain. Florida used to be belong to Spain, not to America, not to England, but it was a Spanish colony that they had. They actually came later on and did colonize the Spanish colonized part of Florida, at least one city we know. But anyway, the discovering of Florida. What was Ponce de Leon searching for? Of course, the Spanish were searching for gold, but he also was searching for the fountain of youth, because he had read and he had studied that in this area now, this new land, that there was waters, fountains, living fountains that you could drink and live forever. So the time in Florida, he was searching for this fountain of youth, which of course he never did find. Vasco da Balboa, he too was searching for treasures, but he, more than treasures, he was searching for a route so that he could go around and into the next ocean, or maybe he didn't know there was an ocean there, but somehow he'd get through the land and then he would come onto the sea and be able to sail all the way to China. So he did. He came to Panama here, and you see where Panama is. If you look on your map, you can see where the Panama, which connects North and South America. And you'll see here his route. It was very small. He realized Panama was very thin. He didn't know. So he got to this side and bingo. I shouldn't say bingo, that would be by chance, but you know, he did discover the Pacific Ocean. So if you have a question that said, who discovered the Pacific Ocean, you'll have to say Vasco de Balboa. And of course, Ponce de Leon, you think of Florida. 1519, we have another Spaniard. This Spaniard was named Magellan, Ferdinand Magellan. You need to know him because he was the first to sail around the world. He was Portuguese. Like I said, a lot of the Portuguese sailed for Spain because Spain gave him the money to buy their boats and stuff. So he was a Portuguese sailor employed by Spain. He took a 3-year journey around the whole world. He sailed across the tip of South America. So the tip of South America is called the Strait of Magellan because that's where he went. So his going across, he crossed the Pacific Ocean, he crossed the Atlantic Ocean, went down to the Strait of Magellan, up to the Pacific Ocean, connecting those two oceans, which is a long journey. Do you see how he had to stop quite often all the way down Latin America, all the way down South America, I should say, at that time. It was called Latin America. Well, he sailed through the Pacific Ocean back over to where the Philippines are over here, and then on over to the Philippines here. What happened right here? Magellan was killed. So he didn't make it around the world. So you have that question as a test question. Magellan didn't make it around the world. He was killed, but his crew finished the journey, as we can see, and went all the way back, and all the way back to Spain. And of course, they were considered heroes that they had finished their journey around the world. It started with 5 ships and several hundred men, and it returned with only 1 ship and 18 men. They lost 4 of the ships, and how many men? Hundreds of men they lost, including Magellan. But Magellan was considered the first to circumnavigate, that means go around, the whole globe, proving, what proving? Proving that the world is round. Yes, he proved the world was round by sailing the world. Spain claimed the lands of Philippines and the Pacific Islands, and they realized that the Orient was not so close as they thought, that there was a vast distance to the Orient. It took a lot longer than they thought to go around the world. And this distance in between was a new world that they called America. Hernando Cortez in Mexico. Let's stop there because we're getting kind of long, and we'll start in our next video with Hernando Cortez.